AM 1450 KATE, temperature dropping down to 34 degrees, light snow. Brian Hensley in with me today from Intego Financial. And Brian, I have to give you a bad time because last week you were in on the Tuesday and you said, maybe a half inch.
I'm an optimist in this situation, so I was praying that we'd have half an inch of snow, and I was off by about 20-fold, I think.
So I took a picture of my 10 inches and I sent it to Brian in the morning. I said, really? Come on.
Yeah, I missed it completely.
Well, and like you said, that's why you're in the business you're in, and you're not a meteorologist.
That's why I stick to helping families on the farms and not being a meteorologist, like you said.
Brian Hensley with us today, Intego Financial. And Brian, today we're going to talk a little bit about transition planning. My first question is, transition planning and succession planning, are they the same?
They are somewhat. They're a little bit different. The transitions are usually more planned.
Okay.
So coming down the road that I'm 70 and I want to be done farming in 5 years. And so how do we make that transition happen on my time frame? Succession planning is probably a little more, every business should have a succession plan right now, because we don't know how things are going to function, and I could not make it back to the office this afternoon. And if I didn't, how do we make sure that the office and the business continues? So succession planning is I think of it more as an emergency gap.
Okay.
And transition is I'm taking charge and I'm going to lay out how this process is going to happen on my time frame.
So what are our first steps when it comes to the transition planning?
Well, we've got to start the conversation. In my opinion, that's probably the absolute most fearful part. We don't even know a lot of times what we want ourselves, so it's hard to start that conversation. So I think you got to start thinking to yourself, what do I want to see happen to the farm or my small business? And then you've got to kind of branch out. Okay, who else is involved? If there's a spouse involved, do the two of us share the same ideas on what this farm looks like? And then, what about kids? What about that? And maybe we don't have kids coming back to the farm. Maybe there's a couple key individuals on the farm. What do they think? What do they see the succession plan looking like? And so you start seeing where there's similarities and where there's differences. But you've got to start that conversation, and that's often the hardest part. The first step's so hard.
It can be very emotional.
It is. We're dealing with family dynamics. We're dealing with challenges. We're dealing with things that maybe have been set aside for 10 years or 30 years or 50 years. And so we're maybe scraping off some of the Band-Aids that have been there and ignored and digging a little deeper on the issue.
Yeah, I remember 10 years ago when I got the phone call. It's like, okay, we're having a family meeting at noon on Sunday. No spouses. Just you and your brothers. Just come on out. We're going to have this family meeting. And that was that first step into, okay, we got to look to the future.
And hopefully we start that conversation by mom and dad aren't sick and they're not dying. Because almost every time I've been on one of these conversations, when we start the meeting, that's usually the first thing we have to cover is this is an emergency. This isn't a bad thing. Mom and dad are being proactive. Mm-hmm. They're thinking about the future. They want your input. They care about what you have to say, and they want to know what you're thinking. And so it's a good conversation. It's a very unselfish conversation. The selfish thing is to not have the conversation.
Sure.
Just, hey, you know what? If you pass away, you're not going to be here to deal with it. It's not your problem. So the unselfish farmer, the unselfish business person stops and says, for the good of everybody, this is something we need to tackle. And that starting the conversation is very difficult.
And, you do have to start it early because there is paperwork that you want filed before that emergency situation comes. And, and you don't want that family land put in a bad position.
Absolutely. The longer you plan for anything, the better you can be prepared when it happens. And so by starting this process early, you're able to select all the options are on the table for you still. If you wait till dad's 70 and son's 45 to start this conversation, there's a lot of options that may not exist anymore. Whereas if, we're in our 50s and we're starting to think about this, it may not happen for another 20 or 25 years, and that's great. But every day as time goes by, options get taken off the table for both the older farmer and the younger farmer. And that's the last thing we want. We want all the options on the table so that the farmer gets to decide his vision of what that future of the farm looks like.
And that's just one of the many things that Intego Financial and you and Sarah can help producers with.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the big part. That's where my passion is. I love the investment side. We do retirement planning and 401ks and all the fun financial parts that are required for any family or business. But the farm succession planning is a real passion.
So what you said, make that conversation. That's the first step. And I think keep it urgent. Don't put it on that back burner and say, oh, maybe we don't need to look at it right now. We took the first step and started the conversation, so maybe in a few years we'll.
And farming's great because every 3 months we have a new excuse of why we can't do something. We're either planting or spraying or harvesting or tax season or guess what? It's planting time again. So you've got to keep it urgent. You've got to build your team. You've got to know what experts you can reach out to, who can be on your team to help make this happen. That you get one shot at this. And so you've got to do it right. You need to have people that have done it, know what they're doing on your team. But you've got to start the conversation first.
And these are just some of the things that Brian and I are going to be talking about here in the weeks to come. And Intego Financial, if people want a little bit more information about Intego Financial, of course, we talked a little bit last week. You are kind of in with Donna Nelson Insurance. So people can, of course, find you out there.
Absolutely. The phone number is 874-3419. Also have a website, integofinancial.com. It's a little limited because of security investments and what I'm allowed to say and not do on there, but it's a good place to start getting some information, and I'm always open for a conversation.
All right. Brian, thanks for stopping in again this week. We'll talk to you a little bit later on and continue talking about the transitions and the estates and get all those hopefully important questions answered.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Brian Hensley with me today.